Hello everyone, it's Dr. Leili Hatami. In this video, we're gonna go over the anatomy and physiology of the integumentary system, also known as the skin system. The integument means skin. The integumentary system consists of skin and its accessory structures such as hair, nails, sweat glands, and sebaceous or oil glands. In today's lecture, we're going to focus more on skin anatomy and physiology. This is the image of skin. Although you may not typically think of the skin as an organ, it is in fact an awesome organ. Do not forget, the skin is an organ. It is not a tissue, but it's actually made up of some tissues that work together as a single structure to perform vital functions. The skin is your largest organ of the body, accounting for about 15% of the total adult body weight. The skin is composed of two layers, the epidermis, which is this top layer, and dermis, this deep layer. So the skin consists of two distinct regions, the superficial region, which we called epidermis, and the deep layer or deep region, which we called as dermis. This underlies epidermis. The outermost layer or the top layer, the epidermis, is made up of epithelial tissue, which doesn't have a direct blood supply, or it's avascular. We mentioned about the vascular in epithelial tissue in the last chapter as well. The epidermis, which is a deep layer, is made up of mostly fibrous connective tissue or dense connective tissue. There is another layer below to the skin, which we call this as hypodermis or subcutaneous layer or superficial fascia. The hypo means below. Hypodermis means a layer below the dermis. Subcutaneous, sub also means under, and cutaneous means skin. Subcutaneous layer means a layer below to the skin, which is a fat tissue under the skin. Don't forget, this is not a part of skin. It's mostly made up of adipose tissue that is going to be under the skin and provides a cushion that works like a shock absorber and insulation for your body. It anchors the skin to underlying structures such as muscles. You might have heard about this subcutaneous injection, right? This subcutaneous injection is a shot with a short needle. It's used to inject the drug into the fat layer, which we have below the dermis or between the skin and muscle. So here we should have muscle. And here we have skin. This layer, which is our subcutaneous layer, we're going to give a shot with a short needle to inject the drug into this layer, which is between the skin and muscle. Subcutaneous injection allows drugs such as insulin, heparin to be absorbed slowly over a period of time. Let's look at the epidermis a little bit in detail. The epidermis is the topmost layer of the skin, which is a keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. It means there are different layers of epithelial cells which we have on top of the basement membrane. So there are a lot of layer on top of the basement membrane, and the surface layer we have flattened or squamous epithelial cells, and in the top layer we have keratin. This is our keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. And also, you know that is avascular, which means it doesn't have any blood vessel to supply it, and it's always going to be supplied by a connective tissue that we always going to have below the epithelial tissue or under the basement membrane. The epidermis is divided into 4 to 5 distinct layers. From deep to superficial, we have stratum basilae, stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, stratum lucidum, and stratum corneum. In thick skin, we have 5 layers. In thin skin, we have only 4 layers. Which layer we're missing in thin skins? We don't have stratum lucidum in thin skin. Stratum lucidum only would be found in thick skin. Okay, let's review the layer of epidermis one more time. From the deepest, we have stratum basilae. Top to the stratum basilae, there is layer of stratum spinosum, and there is stratum granulosum, stratum lucidum, and stratum corneum. So the superficial layer of the epidermis is the stratum corneum. In the palms and soles, which there are thick skin, a layer beneath the stratum corneum is called stratum lucidum. So we don't have a stratum lucidum in thin skin. We only have the stratum lucidum in thick skin. Like what? Like palms and soles. Okay, let's go over each of these layers from top to the deep. A stratum corneum or horny layer. This is the most superficial layer, which we have about 20 to 30 layer of dead cells. Yes, dead cells. Because you cannot find any nucleus here, there is no organelles inside of these cells, and these cells are just filled with the protein keratin, and they are dead cells. Why do we have these kind of dead cells on the surface of the skin? What are the benefits of these dead cells? Actually, these dead cells provide an important function for our body. These dead cells provide a barrier to prevent water loss, provide mechanical protection to the underlying epidermis from abrasion and penetration, and also act as a barrier against biological, chemical, and physical assaults. Next layer is the stratum lucidum or clear layer. The stratum lucidum is named for its translucent appearance under a microscope. This layer is located above the stratum granulosum and below the stratum corneum of the thick skin. Next layer is the stratum granulosum. The stratum granulosum, it has about 4 to 6 cell layers of flattened cells. You can see the nucleus inside of these cells, but actually these cells lost their organelles. Actually, we can say that this layer is the most superficial layer of the epidermis containing living cells. Cells above this layer are dead cells. It means in the stratum lucidum and stratum corneum, we have dead cells, but the stratum granulosum is the most superficial layer containing living cells. It's composed of 4 to 6 layers of flattened cells. They have nucleus, abundant granules in their cytoplasm. There are two types of granules found in these cells: lamellar granule and cretohyaline granules. The lamellar granule contain lipids that is spread out over the cell surface and waterproof it, or they are involved in slowing water loss across the epidermis. Cretohyaline granules contain proteins involved in formation of keratin. Next layer is the stratum spinosum. The stratum spinosum or prickly layer is a thick layer, about 8 to 10 layer of keratinocytes, which they have their nucleus, their other organelles, and also a lot of desmosomes junctions would be found in this layer between the keratinocytes, which these desmosomes junctions adhere the cells to each other. This skin is subjected to a lot of abrasion and a lot of mechanical stress. The desmosome, which are connecting junctions, help to hold the cells together during such a stress. So we can see a lot of desmosome junction between these cells. The next layer is the stratum basale, the basal layer. This layer is the deepest epidermal layer which we have on top of the basement membrane. So this is the basement membrane, and here on the stratum basale there is only one layer of cuboidal cells on top of the basement membrane. Actually, they are kind of stem cells, which means they can divide unlimitedly and they can differentiate to other cells. So again, the basal layer is the innermost layer or the deepest layer of the epidermis, contains a one layer of cuboidal cells. These basal cells continually divide and new cells can constantly push older ones up toward the surface of the skin, where they eventually die and shed, which this takes about 25 to 45 days. The basal layer is also named as the stratum germinativum, which it's due to their germinating new cells or producing new cells. As I mentioned, don't forget, this is one layer of mitotic stem cells. These cells are able to divide and produce the exact similar cells, which is going to be by mitosis. In skin, in the epidermis of skin, there are four cell types. We have keratinocytes, melanocytes, dendritic or Langerhans cells, tactile or Merkel cells. Keratinocytes are the most abundant cell of epidermis, which between these cells we have desmosome junctions. What's their job is very obvious from their name, keratinocyte. It means these cells produce keratin. The other cells which we have in epidermis, which can be found in the stratum basale of the epidermis, the deepest layer, is melanocyte. Again, melanocyte function is also obvious. They are responsible to produce melanin. The melanin are the pigment, the skin pigment, which the melanocyte gonna produce it is a natural skin pigment, but the melanocyte not gonna store the melanin inside of them. They're going to be absorbed by keratinocyte. When the melanocytes, let me just magnify this picture, you can find melanocyte here. This is our melanocyte. It's going to produce melanin. Then the keratinocyte going to absorb the melanin. And then we're gonna have melanin in the cytoplasm of keratinocyte. In keratinocyte, the melanin gonna make a shield around the nucleus of the keratinocyte like this, which is going to protect the nucleus or the genetic material which we have inside of the nucleus from the UV damage. Let's go over the other cells which would be found in the epidermis, dendritic or Langerhans cells. The dendritic or Langerhans cells, they are actually the skin macrophages. They are part of our immune system, located at the stratum spinosum. They are identical to tissue macrophages. Their job is to engulf the microorganisms and present them to lymphocytes. We're going to talk about the dendritic cells in AP2 in the immune system as well. The next cells can be found in the epidermis is the tactile or Merkel cells. They are located at the stratum basally and they are sensitive to touch, or they can be as sensory touch receptors. Do not forget the function of each cells are so important to know. So let's review. The keratinocyte produce keratin, melanocyte produce melanin. Dendritic cells are part of our immune system, or they are the antigen presenting cells. And the tactile cells are part of our nervous system, which they are sensitive to touch, or they act as sensory touch receptors. Now it's time to check your understanding with some questions. Please take a time to answer these questions. Okay, so our skin is made up of epidermis and dermis. We talked about the epidermis, which you can see it's composed of cells on top of the basement membrane. So this is our basement membrane, and then these are the cells on top of the basement membrane, which is keratinized, stratified, squamous epithelium. We talked about the epidermis layer. Now it's time to go over the dermis. Dermis is made up of connective tissue. So in the chapter before this chapter, we talked about the connective tissues structure, which is composed of cells and extracellular matrix, which in extracellular matrix we have fibers and ground substance. The cells that we can find in dermis is composed of fibroblasts, macrophages, mast cells, and white blood cells. And also there are different type of fibers like collagen fibers, elastic fibers, reticular fibers that we can find in the dermis. It also contains nerve fibers, a lot of blood vessels and lymphatic vessels, and also we can find the hair follicles, oil and sweat glands in the dermis. And also do not forget we have also a smooth muscle, which we call this as erector pili muscle. We can find in dermis. We're going to talk about it very soon. There are two layers of papillary and reticular found in the dermis. Let's look at this image. The papillary layer is the superficial layer of the dermis. This red line shows the basement membrane, which it determines the border between epidermis and dermis. The uppermost part of the dermis is called papillary layer, which is an areolar connective tissue. its exact tissue is going to support the epidermis. You should know that the dermis extends up into the epidermis in structures called dermal papillae. Dermal papillae are peg-like projections which increase the surface area between the epidermis and dermis. They help adhesion between the dermal and epidermal layers, and also they provide a large surface area to exchange oxygen, nutrients, and waste with the epidermal layer, which is avascular. So in this way, we can see many capillary or tiny blood vessels here in this layer, and also there are some receptors such as Meissner corpuscle, which they are touch receptors, and also pain receptors, which they are free nerve ending in this layer. In thick skin of the palm of the hands and soles of the feet, dermal papillae lie atop dermal ridges that cause epidermal ridges called friction ridges. The friction ridges are three-dimensional structures with irregular surfaces separated by narrower valleys. These friction ridges serve some basic purposes. First, they allow us to grip and hold on to various surfaces. They contribute to sense of touch, and also in forensic, they serve as a method of individual identification as fingerprints. The next layer of the dermis is reticular layer, which is the most part of the dermis. 80% of dermal thickness is reticular layer, which is dense, fibrous connective tissue, or dense, irregular connective tissue, which it means that there are a lot of collagen bundles in this connective tissue, which they are not parallel to each other. They can be found in different directions. And also elastic fibers will be found in the reticular layer. The elastic fibers provide stretch recoil properties, and collagen fibers provide strength and resiliency. Cleavage lines are also called tension lines. They represent the orientation of parallel bundle of collagen fibers in the dermal layer of the skin. These lines are important to surgeons. These lines cannot be seen from the external view. They are important to surgeons because any procedure resulting in a cut parallel to the cleavage line usually leads to optimal scar formation and also heal more readily. Flexure lines. Let's look at your hands, wrists, fingers, soles, and toes. You can find these skin marking called flexure lines. They are deep creases in the skin at or near joint. In these areas, the skin cannot slide easily for joint movement because dermis tightly secured to deeper structures. Striae or the stretch marks, they are silvery white scars commonly appear during or after pregnancy or after a sudden change in your weight because of overstretched. Some collagen fibers are torn. So the extreme stretching causes dermal tears. So that makes striae, these kind of silvery white scars. Blister. Blister is the other skin marking, which is a small pocket of fluid that separates the epidermal and epidermal layers, usually caused by forceful rubbing, burning, freezing, chemical exposure, or infection. Most blisters are filled with a clear fluid, either serum or plasma. Now you know the structure of the skin, but let me ask you a question. What determines your skin color? There are three pigments contribute to skin color: melanin, keratin, and hemoglobin. The skin color is largely determined by a pigment called melanin, the only pigment made in skin, and it has two forms, reddish yellow to brownish black. So dark skinned people have the brownish black melanin, and light skinned people have reddish yellow melanin. The melanocytes, which they are responsible to produce melanin, increase their production of melanin in response to sun exposure. That's the reason in sun exposure you're gonna get tan. You're gonna be darker. Okay, so the next pigment is keratin. The keratin is a lipochrome that normally adds yellow color to the skin. So it's a yellow to orange pigment. The hemoglobin is the iron containing protein pigment of your blood cells. A lack of oxygen saturation imparts a paler, grayer, or bluer color to the skin. So, hemoglobin also can affect our skin color. So color differences is due to amount and form of melanin produced in melanocyte. Dark skinned people have more melanin in their skin than light skinned people. And also, as I mentioned before, the form of their melanin different as well. So the amount and form of melanin. But pay attention, the number of melanocyte in all people is kind of similar to each other. So there are same relative number of melanocyte in all people. So what can cause our color, the skin color? Amount of melanin produced by melanocyte, the form of melanin that we have, and what about the number of melanocyte? The number of melanocyte is not a factor that can change our skin color because there are same relative number of melanocyte in all people. And then we talked about the melanin. They migrate to keratinocyte. They are not going to be stored in melanocyte. They migrate to keratinocyte to form pigment shields for nuclei, which is going to protect it from damage of UV light. Freckles are small brown spots on your skin, often in areas that get sun exposure. In most cases, freckles are harmless. They form as a result of overproduction of melanin. There are some medical terminology for skin color in diagnosis. Cyanosis is a bluish discoloration of the skin resulting from low oxygenation of blood. Erythema is a medical word, means redness as a result of fever, hypertension, inflammation, and allergy. Pallor is a pale color of the skin that can be caused by anemia, low blood pressure, fear, and anger. Jaundice Jaundice skin is a yellow skin because of high level of bilirubin, a yellow-orange bile pigment caused by liver disorder. The bronzing is or darkening skin color can be seen in Addison disease. In Addison disease, your adrenal glands, which they are the organs located just above your kidneys, these glands produce too little of certain hormones. So in their face, we can see some darkening spots. We call this as bronzing. Bruise appears on the skin due to trauma, which is clotted blood beneath the skin. The next topic is regarding the arrector pili muscle, which can be found in the dermis layer of our skin. The arrector pili muscle are smooth muscle which these muscles are involuntary muscle. It means they are not under our control. Contraction of these muscles stimulated by our sympathetic system causes the hairs to stand on end, known as goosebumps. The most obvious time we experience goosebumps is when we're cold or when we have an intense emotional response to something. The next structures can be found in dermis, layer of our skin, or sweat glands. Sweat glands are called as sodiferous gland. All the skin surfaces except nipples and parts of external genitalia, we have sweat glands. There are about 3 million of sweat glands per person. And there are two main types of sweat glands, merocrine or eccrine sweat glands and apocrine sweat glands. The eccrine glands or merocrine glands are the major sweat glands of the human body. So the most numerous sweat glands found in all the skin, with the highest density in palms and soles and forehead. Their duct opens directly onto the surface of your skin. These glands are controlled by the sympathetic nervous system. They regulate body temperature. So their function is important. They are involved in thermoregulation. Their secretion is sweat, which is 99% water, salts, vitamin C, antibodies, and dermicidin, which is a peptide killing microbe, and also sweat is the way that we can eliminate our metabolic waste. The other type of sweat glands are apocrine sweat glands. They are typically larger than eccrine glands, found mostly in areas abundant with hair follicles, such as axillary area and anogenital areas. They produce fatty sweat, which it also contains a little bit of protein as well. It's a viscous, milky, or yellowish product. The which are released into hair follicles by their duct. So look at the apocrine gland in this image, and through their duct, they're going to release their milky viscous products into hair follicles, and apocrine glands start to function at puberty. The under the stimulation of sex hormones. Unlike eccrine glands, the exact function of apocrine gland is unknown. We do know they are activated during time of stress, pain, and sexual foreplay. They are not responsible for thermoregulation. They are most responsible for our body odor. So when we have sweat, the bacteria gonna break down the sweat, which released by apocrine gland, and they can make an odor. There are some modified apocrine glands in our body as well, in our external ear canal, and also the mammary gland is going to be a modified apocrine gland. In this picture, you can see that in dermis, we have these gland, eccrine gland, which under microscope, you can see something like this picture. Sebaceous gland is another accessory structure which we can find in the dermis layer of our skin. It's widely distributed, but we cannot find them in this thick skin of palms and soles. So these are the oil secreting glands of your body that are found in the dermis of most of our skin, except in thick skin of the palms of the hands and soles of the feet. They usually open up into the hair follicle. Look at this picture. You can find the sebaceous gland here, which their duct gonna be open up into the hair follicle. Then they release their oily product into the hair follicle. Their oily product, which is called sebum, soften hair and skin, so ensures our hair doesn't become too dry and brittle. And also there are going to be found some bactericidal substances in sebum as well. So in this picture, you can see a photo micrograph of a section sebaceous gland. So under microscope, they look like the fat tissue. Now it's time to check your understanding. Please read this question and answer this question to check your understanding. Next topic is about functions of the integumentary system. Can you believe that our skin has very important function and it's an awesome organ in our body? Protection, body temperature regulation, cutaneous sensation, metabolic function, blood reservoir, and excretion are the function of the integumentary system. How our skin can protect us? The skin can make three types of barriers: chemical barriers, physical barriers, and biological barriers. As chemical barriers, their skin secretions such as low pH, sebum, defensin, and melanin are the factors which make our skin as chemical barriers. So the low pH of skin, sebum, defensin, these gonna inhibit growth of harmful bacteria and fungi. Melanin is a skin pigment, makes a shield around the nucleus of keratinocyte to protect the genetic material of skin cells from UV radiation damage. The next, let's look how skin can act as a physical barrier. Do you remember the stratum corneum is the outermost layer of the epidermis, which is largely responsible for the skin, acting as a physical barrier to protect underlying tissue from injection, dehydration, chemicals, and mechanical stress. Keratin also going to be found on the top part of our epidermis or our skin. Is not only give our skin strength but also protect our skin from water. It makes our skin impermeable to water. These barriers block out invading substances and makes a limited penetration of the skin, which some certain substances can pass through it, but most of them cannot pass through the skin because of the keratin. How skin can act as biological barriers. Skin is a biological barrier because of the presence of dendritic cells of epidermis, macrophages of dermis, and DNA itself. Dendritic cells, which are the skin macrophages found in epidermis, and macrophages of dermis, their job is to capture the antigen and present them to the white blood cells. So they act as antigen presenting cells and act as a biological barrier for our skin. DNA itself, it also absorb the UV radiation and then convert it to the heat, and in this way it can protect itself. Next look how skin can regulate our body temperature. If body temperature is normal, each day we have about 500 milliliter insensible perspiration. Perspiration, it means sweating. But insensible perspiration means we are losing water from interstitial fluids that evaporate from our skin. It cannot be felt or seen, and it is not from our sweat glands. This is the meaning of insensible perspiration. Look what's gonna happen for our body when the body temperature rises. If our body temperature rises, the dermal vessels the blood vessels which be found in the dermis layer of our skin dilate. And in this way, they're going to lose a little bit of heat. And also, our sweat gland gonna be more activated. So in this way, again, we're gonna have sensible perspiration. Sensible perspiration, it means that we're gonna have sweat, or our eccrine sweat gland gonna be activated, and then we have a clear secretion produced by eccrine sweat glands. So in this way, we can cool our body. In cold situation, dermal blood vessels constrict, so they can conserve the heat, and also skin temperatures drops to slow passive heat loss. Next function of our skin is act as cutaneous sensations. There are the types of sensory receptors found in the dermis or epidermis of the skin, which can sense the touch, pressure, vibration, temperature, and pain. Skin is also involved in metabolic function. Your keratinocyte produce vitamin D precursor to exposure of UV radiation from the sun, and also the keratinocytes are able to produce enzyme collagenase, and also they can convert the chemical of carcinogens and activate some hormones. There are some examples of the metabolic function of the skin. Also, skin act as a blood reservoir because approximately 5% of the blood is located in the skin. Your body eliminates a limited amount of nitrogen, waste, and salt through the sweat. So that's the reason our skin is also involved in excretion. Now it's time to check your understanding. Please read this question and answer to them. Thank you for watching this video.